When the great clock in my father's hall stopped at midnight, I thought it was merely another mechanical failure until she knocked. The sound echoed through the empty corridors of Whitmore Manor like the tolling of death itself, and I knew immediately that this was no ordinary visitor. No decent person travels these Yorkshire moors at such an ungodly hour, especially not during these troubled times, when Cromwell's men patrol the roads looking for enemies of the Commonwealth. My name is Hadrian Whitmore, and at 30 years of age, I had grown accustomed to the solitude that had become my constant companion since Parliament's soldiers took my parents 3 years prior. They called my father a royalist sympathizer, though his only crime was refusing to surrender the family silver to fund their cause. My mother died of fever that same winter, broken by grief and the harshness of our new reality. Now I manage what remains of our estate alone, save for my loyal steward Thomas and a handful of servants who stayed despite the uncertainty of these times. The knocking came again, more urgent now, and I set down the ledger I had been reviewing by candlelight. The numbers never seemed to balance anymore. Without the tenant farmers, who had fled to avoid conscription, the land yielded barely enough to maintain the manor's basic needs. I had been considering selling some of the remaining artwork when that damned clock chose to stop working entirely, its pendulum swinging to a halt just as the bells of nearby Thornfield Abbey began their midnight toll. I walked slowly toward the heavy oak door, my footsteps echoing on the cold stone floor. Through the diamond-paned windows, I could see nothing but darkness and the occasional glimmer of frost on the bare branches of the elm trees that lined our approach. Whatever lay beyond that door, I sensed it would change everything. When I lifted the iron latch and pulled the door open, my breath caught in my throat. Before me stood a woman unlike any I had ever seen, and yet the sight of her filled me with such profound unease that I nearly slammed the door shut again. She wore the unmistakable garments of the condemned, the rough brown robe and hood that prisoners don for their final walk to the gallows. Around her neck, barely visible beneath the fabric, I could see the cruel red marks left by hemp rope. Her burial shroud, meant to be her final covering, was torn and muddy, as if she had clawed her way from the very earth itself. But it was her eyes that held me frozen in place. They burned with an intensity one had never witnessed in any living person, desperate and haunted yet somehow still beautiful. She was perhaps 26 years of age, with features that spoke of noble birth despite her current wretched state. Her dark hair fell in tangled waves around her shoulders, and when she spoke, her voice carried the refined accent of someone born to privilege. "Please," she whispered, her words barely audible above the wind that had begun to howl across the moors. "I beg you, grant me sanctuary. They think I am dead, and if you turn me away, I soon shall be." I should have closed the door. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at me to send this apparition back into the night, and pretend I had never seen her. In these times, harboring fugitives meant certain death, and the garb she wore marked her as someone who had already faced the executioner's noose. But something in her manner, some quality of desperation mixed with dignity, made me step aside instead. "Come in quickly," I found myself saying, though even as the words left my lips, I wondered what madness had possessed me. "Before someone sees you." She stumbled across the threshold, and I caught her arm to steady her. Beneath the coarse fabric of her prison robe, I could feel how violently she was trembling, whether from cold or fear or both. I guided her toward the great hall, where the fireplace still held enough warmth to chase away the chill that seemed to emanate from her very being. In the flickering light of the fire, I could see her more clearly, and what I saw both horrified and fascinated me. The rope burns around her neck were fresh, the skin raw and angry. Her hands bore cuts and scrapes, as if she had indeed dug herself free from some terrible fate. Yet beneath the grime and trauma, there was something unmistakably refined about her bearing, the way she held herself despite her obvious exhaustion. "You were hanged," I said, the words coming out as barely more than a whisper. It was not a question. The evidence was written across her flesh in marks that would take weeks to fade, if they ever did. She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. "The rope broke," she said simply. "They thought it was God's judgment, that I was too wicked even for death to claim. In their superstition and fear, they buried me in unhallowed ground with these clothes as my shroud. But I was not dead, merely unconscious, and when I woke—" She touched her throat gingerly. "I clawed my way out and ran. The story was so incredible that I might have dismissed it as the ravings of a mad woman, except for the physical evidence before me. No one could fabricate such marks, such genuine terror mixed with desperate hope. Whatever this woman had done to earn a death sentence, she had indeed cheated the executioner, at least temporarily. "What crime brought you to the gallows?" I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. In these times, people were executed for everything from witchcraft to speaking against Parliament to simply being born into the wrong family. Her laugh was bitter and filled with pain. "They called me a witch," she said, settling into the chair I had pulled close to the fire. "I have knowledge of herbs and healing, skills passed down from my grandmother. When the harvest failed last summer and children in Thornfield Village began to sicken, I tried to help them with what remedies I knew. For my trouble, I was accused of causing both the crop failure and the illness through dark magic. The injustice of it struck me like a physical blow. I had seen too many innocent people condemned on trumped-up charges, their only crime being different or inconvenient to those in power. "What is your name?" I asked softly. She hesitated for a long moment, as if deciding whether she could trust me with even that much truth. Finally, she spoke a name that made my blood run cold. "Evangeline Thornfield." I knew that name. Everyone in Yorkshire knew it. Lady Evangeline Thornfield, daughter of the late Earl of Blackmore, had been executed for witchcraft just 3 days prior. The news had spread quickly through the countryside, another reminder of how quickly fortune could turn in these dangerous times. Yet here she sat in my hall, very much alive, and looking at me with those haunting, desperate eyes. "Where are you watching this from tonight? I would love to know which part of the world is following along as this impossible story unfolds." The revelation hit me like a musket ball to the chest. Lady Evangeline Thornfield was supposed to be dead, her body buried in unhallowed ground beyond the village walls. Yet here she sat before my fire, flesh and blood and very much alive. The implications terrified me more than I cared to admit. If the authorities discovered I was harboring someone who had supposedly died for witchcraft, my own neck would soon feel the kiss of the hangman's rope. "You know who I am," she said, reading the recognition in my expression. "I can see it in your face. You have heard the stories, no doubt. How the Earl's daughter consorted with dark forces and brought ruin to honest Christian folk." I studied her carefully in the firelight, trying to reconcile the broken woman before me with the tales that had spread like wildfire through the countryside. "I heard you caused the harvest to fail through malicious magic," I said slowly. "That you poisoned the wells and cursed the children with fever." Her eyes flashed with anger, the first real emotion I had seen from her beyond desperate fear. "And do you believe such nonsense?" she demanded. "Look at me, truly look. Do I seem like some ancient crone who dances with demons under the full moon? I am 26 years old, trained in the healing arts by my grandmother, who learned them from her grandmother before her. Everything I did was to help people, not harm them. I found myself leaning forward, drawn in despite the danger." "Then tell me what really happened. Why did they condemn you?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames as if the fire held answers to questions I had not even asked. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of deep pain and injustice. "The harvest failed because of drought, nothing more. Any farmer with half a brain could see that. But people need someone to blame when disaster strikes, and a woman living alone with knowledge they do not understand makes a convenient target." She touched the rope burns at her throat absently. "When the children fell ill, I went to the village with medicines I had prepared. Willow bark for fever, elderberry syrup for their cough, poultices to draw out the poison from their bodies." "And did your remedies work?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Too well," she said bitterly. "Within days, the fever had broken and the children were recovering. But instead of gratitude, I found suspicion. How could a mere woman succeed where the village physician had failed, unless she possessed unnatural powers?" The whispers began immediately. "If I could cure illness so quickly, surely I could cause it just as easily." I felt a familiar anger rising in my chest, the same rage that had consumed me when Parliament soldiers dragged my father away for the crime of loyalty to his king. "So they decided you were a witch based on your success in healing their children?" The magistrate needed very little convincing. She continued. "Cornelius Grimwald has made a career of finding witches where none exist, collecting his fee for each conviction. A nobleman's daughter, with no male relatives to protect her inheritance, made an especially attractive target. With me dead and declared a witch, my lands would be forfeit to the Commonwealth, and Grimwald would receive his share of the spoils. The corruption sickened me, though it no longer surprised me. I had seen too many good people destroyed by those who profited from the current chaos. You said your rope broke during the execution. How is that possible? A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. My grandmother always said I was blessed with uncommon luck. The hemp was old and frayed, and when they put the noose around my neck, I whispered a prayer to every saint I could remember. When the trapdoor opened, the rope snapped clean through about halfway down. The fall knocked me unconscious, and in their superstition, everyone assumed it was a sign that even death rejected me as too evil to claim. They buried you alive, I said, horrified by the callousness of it. In a shallow grave beyond the consecrated ground, wrapped in this shroud and dressed in these clothes as a warning to others. She pulled the coarse fabric tighter around her shoulders. But the earth was soft from recent rains, and when I came to my senses hours later, I managed to claw my way to the surface. I have been wandering the moors for 2 days, avoiding the roads and hiding during daylight, until I saw the light in your windows tonight. I stood and walked to the sideboard where I kept a bottle of brandy, my mind racing with the implications of her story. If she was telling the truth, and every instinct told me she was, then a terrible injustice had been done. But harboring her was a death sentence for both of us if we were discovered. You need food and proper clothing, I said, pouring 2 glasses of the amber liquid. And those wounds need tending. But first, you need to understand the danger you have brought to my door. She accepted the brandy gratefully, wincing as the alcohol touched her torn lips. I know what I am asking of you, she said quietly. I would not have come here if I had anywhere else to go. But I remembered your family's reputation for kindness, how your father once sheltered a priest who was fleeing Cromwell's persecution. I hope perhaps my father died for that kindness, I said sharply, then immediately regretted the harshness in my voice. I am sorry. I do not blame you for his fate, but you must understand that I am already under suspicion. One whisper that I am harboring a convicted witch, and we will both be dancing at the end of a rope. Tears began to flow down her cheeks, the first I had seen since she arrived. Then tell me to leave, she whispered. Send me back into the night, and I will trouble you no more. I have already died once. Perhaps it is time to accept that fate. The defeat in her voice broke something inside my chest. Despite the danger, despite every rational thought that screamed at me to turn her away, I could not abandon this woman to the wolves that hunted her. There was something about her dignity in the face of such suffering, her quiet courage despite having every reason to despair, that spoke to something deep in my soul. You will stay, I said firmly. At least until you have recovered your strength, and we can devise a plan for your safety. Hope flickered in her eyes, like a candle flame in a storm. You would risk your life for a stranger? For someone the world believes to be a witch? I moved closer to her chair, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, close enough to smell the earth and fear that still clung to her despite the warmth of the fire. I have lived alone in this house for 3 years, I said softly. 3 years of silence broken only by the sound of my own footsteps and the scratching of my quill across ledger pages. If God has seen fit to bring you to my door, perhaps it is not mere coincidence. She reached out tentatively and touched my hand, her fingers cold but steady. Thank you, she whispered. I swear to you, I am not what they say I am. I believe you, I replied, and realized as I spoke the words that I meant them completely. Whatever else Lady Evangeline Thornfield might be, she was no witch. She was simply a woman who had been crushed beneath the wheels of injustice and corruption, much as my own family had been. But as I looked into those haunting eyes, I felt something stirring in my chest that I had not experienced since before my parents' death. For the first time in years, I was no longer alone, and despite the terrible danger that surrounded us both, I found myself grateful for her presence. The great clock in the hall might have stopped at midnight, but perhaps that was simply time's way of telling us that our old lives were ending, and something new was about to begin. The days that followed her arrival passed like scenes from a dream I never wanted to wake from. I moved Evangeline to the small chamber adjoining my mother's former sitting room, a space that received morning sunlight and remained warm throughout the day. Thomas, my loyal steward, asked no questions when I requested hot water, clean linens, and one of my mother's old gowns. His weathered face spoke volumes about what he thought of harboring fugitives, but his loyalty to the Whitmore family ran deeper than his concern for our safety. I found myself spending more time in that wing of the manor than I had since my mother's death. At first, I told myself it was merely Christian duty, ensuring my guest recovered properly from her ordeal. But as the rope burns on her neck began to fade, and the haunted look gradually left her eyes, I was forced to confront a truth that both thrilled and terrified me. I was falling in love with Lady Evangeline Thornfield, the woman the world believed to be dead. She proved to be unlike any woman I had ever known. While recovering her strength, she insisted on helping with the household tasks, much to the shock of our few remaining servants. I would find her in the kitchen garden, examining the withered herb beds with the practiced eye of someone who truly understood the healing properties of plants. When I asked her about it, she smiled with the first genuine happiness I had seen from her. "My grandmother taught me that knowledge unused is knowledge wasted," she explained, kneeling beside the frost-blackened remains of what had once been a thriving medicinal garden. "These beds could yield enough remedies to treat half the countryside, if properly tended." Your mother had excellent taste in her selections. I knelt beside her in the cold earth, watching as she identified each plant despite their dormant winter state. "You speak of her as if you knew her. I met Lady Margaret several times at court functions before." She gestured vaguely at herself, indicating her current circumstances. She was known for her kindness and intelligence. I always admired how she seemed to see through the petty rivalries and political games that consumed so many others. The mention of my mother brought both warmth and pain to my chest. "She would have liked you," I said softly. "She always believed that healing was a sacred calling, regardless of whether it came from university training or traditional knowledge passed down through generations." Evangeline turned to look at me, and I caught my breath at the intensity in her dark eyes. "And what do you believe, Hadrian? Do you think there is witchcraft in knowing which plants can break a fever or ease a woman's labor pains?" Her use of my given name sent an unexpected thrill through me. We had been observing the careful formalities appropriate to our respective stations, but something in this moment called for honesty rather than politeness. "I believe," I said carefully, "that there is more wisdom in your little finger than in all the learned magistrates who condemned you. What they call witchcraft, I call knowledge that threatens their authority." She smiled then, the kind of smile that transforms a pretty face into something breathtaking. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Lord Whitmore. Hadrian," I corrected her. "And I suspect I am both." As the winter days passed, our conversations grew longer and more intimate. She told me about her childhood at Blackmore Castle, raised by her grandmother after her parents died of plague. I shared stories of my youth here at Whitmore Manor, the hunting expeditions with my father, and the long evenings listening to my mother read from her collection of poetry. We discovered a shared love of books, and I found myself bringing volumes from the library to her chamber, where we would spend hours discussing philosophy and literature by candlelight. It was during one of these evenings that she revealed more about the events leading to her condemnation. We were seated before the fire in the small sitting room, she with a piece of embroidery that had belonged to my mother, and I with a book of sonnets I was pretending to read, while stealing glances at her profile. "The children who fell ill," she said suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence. "They were not the first I had tried to help." I set down the book and gave her my full attention. "What do you mean?" 3 months before the sickness struck Thornfield Village, I was called to attend a difficult birth in one of the tenant cottages on my land. The woman had been in labor for 2 days with no progress, and the midwife had given up hope for both mother and child. She set down her needle and stared into the flames. I knew of a tea that could strengthen the birthing pains and ease the passage, something my grandmother had taught me years earlier. And the birth was successful? Both mother and babe lived, healthy and strong. But word spread quickly about how I had accomplished what others could not. When Magistrate Grimwald began building his case against me, that woman was among the first to testify. She claimed I had made an unholy bargain to save her child, that no natural remedy could have worked so quickly. The betrayal in her voice made my chest tighten with anger. She turned against you after you saved her life? Fear makes people do terrible things, Evangeline said quietly. Grimwald promised her protection from prosecution if she testified against me. With a newborn infant to protect, what choice did she have? I found myself moving from my chair to kneel beside hers, taking her hand in both of mine. Her fingers were delicate but strong, marked with small scars from years of working with plants and herbs. You could have fled when you realized what was happening. Why did you stay to face trial? She looked down at our joined hands, and I felt her tremble slightly. Where could I have gone? A woman alone, with no family or connections beyond my estate? I believed that truth would prevail, that surely reasonable people would see the absurdity of the charges against me. Her laugh was bitter. I was naive enough to think that justice still meant something in England. It does, I said fiercely. Not in the courts, perhaps, but in the hearts of people who still know right from wrong. You are alive, Evangeline. That must mean something. When she looked up at me, tears were glistening in her eyes. It means I have been given a chance I do not deserve, in the company of a man whose kindness puts my faith in humanity to shame. The space between us seemed to shrink until I could feel the warmth of her breath against my face. You deserve far more than chance has given you, I whispered. Before I could lose my courage, I leaned forward and pressed my lips gently to hers. She stiffened for just a moment, then melted against me with a soft sigh that spoke of loneliness finally finding its answer. The kiss was tender and tentative at first, then deeper as months of solitude and years of pain seemed to flow out of both of us. When we finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine. This is madness, she breathed. I am a condemned witch, a woman who should be dead. Loving me will bring you nothing but ruin. Then let it, I replied, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. I have been dead inside this house for 3 years, going through the motions of living without purpose or joy. If loving you brings ruin, at least I will have truly lived first. But even as I spoke those brave words, I heard the sound that would shatter our fragile happiness. The thunder of hoofbeats on the frozen ground outside, growing closer with each passing second. Multiple horses, riding hard through the night toward Widmore Manor. Evangeline pulled back from me, her face gone white with terror. They have found me, she whispered. The hoofbeats grew louder, and I could make out at least 3 distinct horses thundering up the long drive toward our front door. My mind raced through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Had someone seen the candlelight in Evangeline's chamber? Had word somehow reached the authorities that the Witch of Thornfield had been spotted alive? Quickly, I whispered, pulling her to her feet. There is a priest's hole behind the bookcase in the library, built during the Tudor persecution. My father showed it to me when I was a boy. But even as we hurried through the corridors, I knew we were too late. The riders had reached the courtyard, and I could hear shouted commands echoing off the manor walls. Heavy boots struck the stone steps leading to our entrance, and then came the thunderous pounding on the oak door that I had opened to Evangeline just 5 nights earlier. Lord Widmore! The voice that bellowed through the wood was one I recognized with a sinking heart. Magistrate Cornelius Grimwald himself had come calling. Open this door in the name of the Commonwealth! Evangeline's grip on my arm was desperate. Do not let them take me back, she pleaded. I cannot face the rope again. I would rather die here, with you, than return to that hell. You are not going to die, I said firmly, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Trust me. The pounding came again, more insistent now. I could hear Thomas's voice in the great hall, no doubt stalling for time as he prepared to answer the door. Bless that loyal old man, he understood the game we were playing without needing explanation. I made a decision that would either save us both or damn us together. Instead of hiding Evangeline in the priest's hole, I led her quickly back to her chamber, and pressed one of my mother's traveling cloaks into her hands. Put this on and pull the hood up, I commanded. Keep your head down and say nothing, no matter what happens. Hadrian, what are you planning? Something that will either be remembered as brilliant or incredibly stupid, I replied grimly. But first, I need you to make yourself look as much like a servant as possible. She obeyed without question, wrapping the plain brown cloak around her shoulders, and pulling the hood forward to shadow her features. The execution clothes she still wore beneath were hidden completely, and in the dim candlelight, she could pass for any of the dozens of kitchen maids or washerwomen who worked in great houses throughout Yorkshire. The pounding on the door had become a continuous thundering now, and I heard Thomas finally lift the latch. Grimwald's voice boomed through the entrance hall, demanding to speak with me immediately. I took Evangeline's hand and led her toward the back stairs that the servants used. "Remember," I whispered as we descended, "you are Mary, a scullery maid from the village. You cannot read or write, and you know nothing of politics or medicine. If anyone asks you direct questions, look frightened and defer to me." We reached the kitchen just as I heard Grimwald's boots echoing on the main staircase. He was searching the house systematically, which meant someone had given him reason to believe his quarry was here. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. If Grimwald was this certain, we were walking into a trap. But there was no time for second thoughts. I positioned Evangeline near the great hearth where several of our remaining servants had gathered, clearly awakened by the commotion. She blended in perfectly, just another frightened face among the household staff. "Lord Whitmore!" Grimwald's voice echoed from the great hall. "Present yourself immediately." I walked through the corridors with as much dignity as I could muster, trying to project the image of a man disturbed from his evening reading rather than someone harboring the most wanted fugitive in Yorkshire. Grimwald stood in the center of my family's hall, flanked by 2 armed soldiers in Parliament's colors. He was a thin man with sharp features and cold eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail for future use against his enemies. "Magistrate Grimwald," I said with carefully measured politeness, "to what do I owe the honor of this late visit?" His smile was the predatory grin of a man who believed he held all the advantages. "Do not play games with me, Whitmore. We have received information that you are harboring a dangerous criminal." The witch Evangeline Thornfield was seen in this area 3 days ago. My heart nearly stopped, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. "The witch Evangeline Thornfield is dead, is she not? I heard she was executed and buried beyond Thornfield village." "Her grave was found disturbed," Grimwald said, watching my face carefully for any reaction. "The body was gone, the shroud torn as if she had clawed her way out of the earth itself. Clearly, her dark powers allowed her to cheat death and return to plague God-fearing Christians." I allowed myself a small laugh. "Come now, magistrate. Surely you do not believe such superstitious nonsense. If a grave was disturbed, it was most likely by wild animals or grave robbers looking for anything of value buried with the corpse." But Grimwald was not deterred. "Nevertheless, we will search this house from cellar to attic. If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear." "By all means," I replied, gesturing broadly. "Search wherever you wish. But I must protest this treatment of a loyal subject of the Commonwealth. My family has done nothing to warrant such suspicion." As Grimwald's soldiers began their methodical search, I maintained an air of offended dignity while my mind raced through every possible outcome. They would find nothing in the obvious places, but if they discovered the priest's hole or noticed anything unusual about one of the servants, we were finished. The search seemed to take hours, though it was probably no more than 30 minutes. They examined every chamber, every closet, even the wine cellar and the old armory. But they were looking for a noblewoman in hiding, not a servant cowering in the kitchen with the other staff. Finally, Grimwald returned to the great hall, his frustration evident in the sharp set of his shoulders. "Your house appears clean, Lord Whitmore, but do not think this matter is closed. We have reason to believe the witch seeks sanctuary with royalist sympathizers, and your family's reputation for harboring enemies of Parliament is well known. My father paid the price for his political beliefs," I said coldly. "I have learned from his example, and keep my loyalties to myself." Grimwald stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the wine on his breath and see the calculating intelligence in his pale eyes. "See that you do, Whitmore. The Commonwealth has use for men who understand where their true interests lie. But those who choose the wrong side will find themselves sharing the fate of the traitors they protect." The threat was clear, and I nodded once to show I understood. "I will remember your words, magistrate." After they finally departed, thundering back down the drive toward the main road, I waited a full hour before returning to the kitchen. Evangeline was still huddled near the fire, surrounded by servants, who had accepted her presence without question. When she saw me, the relief in her eyes nearly brought me to my knees. If you're wondering how this impossible situation could possibly resolve itself, make sure you're subscribed to see what happens next, because what I discovered about Evangeline's true mission will change everything you think you know about this story. But for now, as I looked at this remarkable woman who had already faced death once for her compassion toward others, I realized that our troubles were only beginning. Grimwald might not have found his witch tonight, but he would be watching, waiting for any sign that his instincts about Widmore Manor were correct. And next time, I might not be clever enough to keep the woman I love from the hangman's noose. The days following Grimwald's search passed in a strange mixture of fear and growing intimacy. Evangeline had to maintain her disguise as a servant during daylight hours, when any of the remaining staff might observe us together, but our evenings belonged entirely to each other. It was during these precious stolen hours that I learned the full truth about the woman I had fallen in love with, and the discovery shattered everything I thought I knew about her story. We were in the library 3 nights after Grimwald's visit, Evangeline curled in the chair by the fire, while I attempted to concentrate on estate ledgers. The numbers made even less sense than usual, my attention constantly drawn to the way the firelight played across her features, or the graceful movement of her hands, as she turned the pages of a book of poetry. "Hadrian," she said suddenly, setting the volume aside, "there is something I must tell you, something I should have revealed before now." The seriousness in her voice made me set down my quill and give her my complete attention. "What is it?" She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with some internal debate. Finally, she looked directly at me with those dark eyes that had haunted my dreams since the night she arrived. "I was not simply a healer accused of witchcraft," she said slowly. "My knowledge of herbs and medicines, my ability to move through the countryside without suspicion, these skills made me valuable to certain people who opposed Cromwell's rule." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. "What are you saying?" "I carried messages," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Intelligence about troop movements, plans for potential uprisings, communications between royalist sympathizers who could not risk meeting in person. My reputation as a harmless healer allowed me to travel freely between estates and villages where others would be questioned immediately." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You were a spy." She nodded miserably. "The healing was real, my knowledge of plants genuine, but yes, I used those abilities as cover for carrying information that could have changed the course of this war. When Grimwald condemned me for witchcraft, it was not because he truly believed I practiced dark magic. He knew exactly what I was, and execution was the simplest way to silence me permanently." I stood and began pacing the small room, my mind reeling with this revelation. Everything made perfect sense now. Grimwald's certainty that she had survived, his determination to search my house, the way he had spoken of royalist sympathizers harboring enemies of Parliament. "The message you carried when you were captured," I said, turning back to face her. "What was it?" Her face went even paler. "Intelligence about a planned Spanish invasion. Ships gathering in French ports, weapons being smuggled through Ireland, the locations where foreign troops intended to land on English soil. Information that could have allowed Parliament to prepare adequate defenses." "Could have?" I repeated. "You mean the message was never delivered?" "I destroyed it when I realized I was about to be arrested. I memorized the contents, thinking I might have another chance to pass along the intelligence, but then—" She gestured helplessly at herself. "Then I died, or was supposed to die, and the information died with me." I sank into my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was telling me. "This Spanish invasion, when is it supposed to happen?" "Soon," she said urgently. "Within the month, if the intelligence was accurate. Hadrian, thousands of English lives hang in the balance. Cromwell's forces could be caught completely unprepared." The moral complexity of our situation struck me like a thunderbolt. Here was a woman I loved desperately, who had already faced death once for her beliefs, asking me to help her commit what many would consider an act of treason against the established government. Yet if she was right about the Spanish threat, her information could save countless innocent lives. "Who were you supposed to deliver this message to?" I asked quietly. "There is a man in York, a merchant named Benedict Ashworth, who serves as a contact point for intelligence networks. If I could reach him, he could ensure the information reaches the right people in Parliament." I studied her face carefully, looking for any sign of deception or manipulation. But all I saw was the same honesty and courage that had attracted me from the first night she knocked on my door. "You realize what you are asking me to do," I said slowly. "If we are caught, we will both hang as traitors and spies." "I know," she whispered. "I have no right to ask this of you, not when you have already risked so much to keep me alive. But I cannot live with myself knowing that English soldiers might die because I failed to deliver crucial intelligence." I was quiet for several minutes, weighing duty against desire, love against loyalty to my own survival. Finally, I reached a decision that I knew would change both our lives forever. "We leave for York tomorrow night," I said firmly. "I know a route through the back roads that should avoid most of the military patrols. It will be dangerous, but if we travel carefully and keep to the story that you are my servant accompanying me on estate business, we might reach the city undetected." The relief and gratitude in her expression nearly broke my heart. "Thank you," she breathed. "I swear to you, after we deliver this message, we will find a way to disappear together. Perhaps to the American colonies or the Spanish Netherlands. Somewhere we can start fresh without the shadow of our past hanging over us." But even as I nodded agreement, I wondered if such a future was truly possible. Too many people knew our faces, too many enemies sought our destruction. Still, for the chance to build a life with this extraordinary woman, I was willing to risk everything. The next evening, as we prepared to depart for York, Thomas approached me with a heavy heart and a leather satchel filled with gold coins. "My lord," the old steward said quietly, "I have served the Whitmore family for 40 years, and I know the look of a man embarking on a journey from which he may not return. Take this gold, and know that whatever happens, you have my blessing and my prayers." I gripped his weathered hand tightly, too moved to speak for a moment. "If we do not return, Thomas, the manor and all its contents are yours by right. You have been more faithful than any blood relation could have been." As Evangeline and I rode out into the cold Yorkshire night, I felt the weight of destiny settling around us like a cloak. Behind us lay the only home I had ever known. Ahead lay uncertainty and danger beyond imagining. But beside me rode the woman who had brought light back into my darkened world, and for her love, I would face whatever trials awaited us. The great clock in Whitmore Manor's hall had stopped at midnight the night she arrived, marking the end of my old life and the beginning of something new. Now, as we disappeared into the darkness together, I realized that sometimes the most important journeys begin not with fanfare and preparation, but with a simple act of faith in the person riding beside you. Whatever tomorrow would bring, we would face it together, two souls who had found each other in the midst of a world gone mad with fear and hatred. And perhaps, if we were very lucky and very brave, we might just live to see a dawn where love could triumph over the forces that sought to destroy us.